Welcome back to Cross Currents Interviews. We have another great episode for you today. We'll be interviewing Shane Hull, who is in the process of writing a book on the life of Rich Mullins. He has done over 50 hours of interviews with Rich's friends and band members and those who knew him most. And today we'll be talking about Rich's influence on him, Rich's life, and some insights from studio musicians and those who knew him best. I think you'll really enjoy this and hear some fun stories on the life of Rich and the great music that he gave to us. Shane, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
As we begin, what first drew you to Rich Mullins and his music?
When I was in my late teens, I began writing songs. My dad was a pastor of a church, and we had hired a guy to be the youth pastor in our church, youth director, and he wrote songs. And I figured, well, if that guy's smart enough to write songs, I know I can. So at 16, I started writing my own songs. When I was a senior in high school, I moved to Oklahoma from Central Florida and lived with my grandparents for a year and attended a little Foursquare Holiness Bible College there in Bethany, Oklahoma, called Southwestern. While I was there, my brother lived in town in Edmond, Oklahoma, and he was friends with some friends who knew Nathan Nockels and Charlie Hall. Christy Nockels, they do a whole bunch of stuff with Passion and Rocketown Records. Charlie Hall and him were in a band. Charlie Hall is another worship leader from like 12-Step Records with Chris Tomlin and all those fellas. I got to be friends with Nathan. He was doing music with Charlie, and they were kind of a big deal in Oklahoma City at the time. I asked him if he'd be willing to produce my first demo. And I had about 5 or 6 songs, a little EP that I was wanting to work on. And he had a friend of his, I believe his name was Chris, who worked at a local company that would produce these accompaniment tracks for like pop songs in different keys. And so he was an engineer at that place. I think he was the drummer for Charlie and Nathan's band. He had a 2-inch reel-to-reel in his, like a guest bedroom in his house. And they had a little vocal booth in the closet in the bedroom. And it was this little tiny studio. So we went in there and he helped me produce the thing. And so I was in Nathan's dining room of his little apartment there in Edmond. He's kind of working out this. I had a song that kind of aped off of like, it sounded like a Chicago song, Peter Cetera type stuff. And he was working on this Foster type lick in the middle of it. And where the key cycles through, circles of fourths and fifths or whatever. Just really kind of cool. He was very, very talented at music and the piano even back then. You could see that he was just on another level. And in walks Charlie Hall and his boxers. And he says, Shane, he says, have you ever heard of Rich Mullins? And it's like, you mean like Awesome God, man? And he goes, yeah, that's a great song. He says, you need to go right now, like after you leave, go right to the bookstore and buy World as Best as I Can Remember It, Volume 1 and 2. And then you need to not do anything until you've listened to them all the way through, the first to the last. It's like a spiritual experience. I was like, okay. And then he literally just turned on his heels and like moped back across the living room and back into his bedroom and shut the door. And so that afternoon, I went by the local big box Christian bookstore and picked up both volumes, and I put it on, and I literally sat in my car, a little Nissan Sentra. The car was running in the parking lot of the bookstore, and I listened through both records start to finish. I couldn't even drive. I was just captivated by it. That was my introduction all at once. And then, of course, I had this whole back catalog to go and explore, and just really enjoyed his songwriting and everything I listened to. I was just like captivated by, for sure.
Oh, that's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't, but a few months later, it's like I only had to wait. It's kind of like people who binge watch a Netflix show, and they don't start watching the show until like season 8. So when season 9 comes along, they only have to wait a couple of months after they've watched all the other seasons.
Yeah.
So I just a few months after I got Volume 1 and 2 is when Liturgy, Legacy, and Ragamuffin Band came out. It was in the same year I was listening to that record, and I was just kind of blown away by it.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. Not sure if you'll have any input on Rich's spiritual journey, but I heard that he was exploring Catholicism.
Yeah, he was very influenced by G.K. Chesterton. The number of times he discusses the book Orthodoxy, but that book had a really large impact on him. He was definitely moved by his understanding of St. Francis of Assisi. Chesterton's book on that as well. I'm not 100% positive. I've talked to an awful lot of people, about 50 hours. I got another 4 hours worth of stuff today. I spent another half an hour, 40 minutes on the phone with the engineer, Tom Lonnie, and the A&R rep, Don Donahue. I was on the horn for about an hour and 40 minutes today, and Mitch McVicker. Pretty close to 2 hours today we were on the phone. Nobody has really been able to tell me where Rich first came into contact with Orthodoxy by Chesterton. That book plays really heavily into his desire to see a much broader church than a narrower church. One faith, one baptism. There's a lot of Baptists or a lot of Pentecostals, like I grew up with, who would think that if you're not from their particular ilk, that you have none of Jesus and that you're going straight to hell. And the fact that if you confess the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, that and you're baptized under a Trinitarian sign, it means you're Christian. Not that it means that you're regenerate, but it means that you're not a Muslim. or as Chesterton would have put it, he says, you're not a Mohammedan. And you're not a Mormon, and you're not you don't subscribe to the flying spaghetti monster. You're a baptized Christian who professes faith in Christ. And so what that means is, like, if we have a disagreement between ourselves on doctrine, like there is a legitimate disagreement between Protestants and Catholics, it's a family disagreement, and it's a disagreement between brothers. So, I mean, that's the way that I view it. So there are not a lot of people that do. And one of the last things that Rich said in one of his concerts, I believe it was from Lufkin, Texas, just a few days before he passed, he said, I forget exactly specifically what he was talking about, but he said those evangelical preachers, they're not bad people, they're just wrong. There are people within the Protestant faith and there are people within the Catholic faith that are wrong with regards to how we should be treating each other. I think charity should be the overwhelming drive in a Christian's heart towards other Christians. Whether we believe the same thing or not is a side point. The thing that really should drive our relationship with each other is charity. And as Christ said, they will know you're my disciples because of your love for one another. And that's that charity that binds us together, regardless of whether we agree or not. I think the things that make us different are much smaller than what we're willing to admit. And I'd like to see a bit more care and concern for people among brothers.
So in the interviews you've been doing for your book, did you find a lot of things you didn't know about Rich or didn't expect?
Back in my early 20s and my late teens, I was kind of a nerd, what you'd call a liner notes nerd. So I'd pour over the lyrics and all this other stuff. And I was a subscriber to CCM magazine, and the kind of individual that Rich probably would have had a lot of antipathy for. What started all this was a conversation I had with Andrew Peterson a few months back about his note for note rendition of Liturgy, Legacy, and Ragamuffin Band. He tells the story of giving a tape of his songs to Rich and Mitch McVicker, and then years later, he got to know Mitch and became his friend. And he said, "Did you ever listen to that tape?" And he goes, "Yeah, we did." And he says, "What did you think?" He says, "We kind of hated it." As much as I've enjoyed his music over the years, there was no guarantee that he would have had the same appreciation for me that I've had for him. So, and that's just fine. I've enjoyed his music, and that's enough. Talking with everybody, I've learned some things. There are several things that I were aware of that other people weren't aware of, and it's weird. I didn't really think in these terms going into the project. A lot of the session players have not just played on his records, but they've played on thousands of others. You kind of have to remind them, because you know the songs and the lyrics and the arrangements better than they do, because they've played on so many things. Unless they toured in support of it, they weren't familiar with with the songs, which I thought was kind of interesting to have your hands in so many different artistic endeavors that, is just another day for them. I have uncovered quite a few things that are really, really interesting. Just nothing I can share this early on in the process, if that makes sense.
Was there a particular story or a moment in learning about Rich's life that affected you or is affecting you while writing?
Honestly, I think you're familiar with Brennan Manning and his books.
Oh, yes.
I used to read those books incessantly. I just would just pour over them. In a lot of ways, they were very much a comfort in the sense that it's kind of like eating fried food, right? So you eat too much of it, it's actually bad for you. The thing that I hadn't done was to do business with my own sin. But I was looking for something to make me feel better about myself because I was miserable because of my own sin. So I had done things in my life that I needed to be forgiven for, but before I could be forgiven, I had to confess them and I had to repent of them. What I'd not done is actually do business with my own responsibility. At 35 in 2011, at the age of 35, I actually finally confessed my sins and found pardon for the first time in my life. And I went to start apologizing to all the people and to pay restitution and do the things that I needed to do from 35 years of built up. I had a massive pile of grievances that I needed to beg pardon for with all these different people. When I did that, I felt like I was not only saved from my sins, but I was also saved from the need to chase comfort. Like I was saved not only from my own actions and the responsibility for my own actions, but I was also saved from fried food. So I in a lot of ways, I put Brennan and Rich, because I associated the two of them together, on the shelf, and I kind of left them sit there for a decade and a half and not really didn't spend a lot of time with them. So I took a long pause when it came to Rich's music. My sons, Aiden and Noah, they're 19 and 21. They grew up in my house and had no idea who Rich was, which is kind of odd. If you knew me in college, you would have thought that they would have known the lyrics inside and out, listening to those songs growing up in my home, but it just wasn't something that ever came up. And when Andrew Peterson did his recording at the Ryman 8 years ago, and they released it back in October 21st of last year, which would have been Rich's 70th birthday. I gave it a spin while I was driving back from Miami from work. Was just affected by it like I was the first time. You familiar with C.S. Lewis?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. He had a best friend. His name's Owen Barfield. Lucy Barfield is Owen Barfield's niece. Lewis was her godfather. He dedicated Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe to her. But Owen Barfield, he wrote a book called Poetic Diction. And in that book, he describes the felt change of consciousness that takes place when you encounter really beautiful art. So you're actually moved on the interior of your life in a way that can't be redone. Great art compels you to move from one place to another place inside your heart. This is a bad paraphrase, but he says you can't go back to the same line of poesy and expect to find the same reaction in yourself by reading the same line over. If you've ever read Out of the Silent Planet by Lewis, it's part of his space trilogy. Ransom, the main character, has a conversation with one of the creatures that kind of look like an otter. But they're talking about poetry, and he was like, you don't go back to the poem and expect to get the same joy out of it every time. The poem is what it is, and you enjoy it the way that you enjoy it the first time, and that's it. So it's kind of like expecting to listen to a symphony twice in the same day and expect to have the same reaction to it. All that to say, the felt change that I was just massively moved by at 20 or 19 or 20 when I heard that record for the first time happened again in a much deeper way when I listened to it from Andrew. It wasn't that I had the same movement with the record, the same as it was before, but it was kind of like a recapturing of it and a deepening of what I had experienced before. I ended up writing a review of the performance, and that was picked up by an online publication called the Perspectivalist, and Andrew ended up retweeting it and getting it out in front of his followers. As a result of it, I had my conversation with him. It was in that conversation that he told me, I routinely hire session players because I've known they've worked with Rich before, just so I can pump them for stories. Over the next couple of days, as I'd kind of reflected on that conversation, I thought, man, there's the guys that were part of those sessions and that were part of the production of that record. They've got all these wonderful stories. Some of them are getting up there in age. Jimmy Abeg's 72 now. And if I just just really was concerned that the stories hadn't been properly curated. I thought, I'm going to start reaching out to some of these guys and see if I could get them to talk to me about it. And I started with Danny O'Lanerty, the bass player, and moved on to Reed Arvin. And me and Jimmy have talked 8 or 10 hours together. I talked to guys who toured in support of the record. I talked to Mark Robertson and Tom Lonnie. I was telling you about him before, who's the engineer, and Shane Wilson, who was the assistant mix engineer, and Don Donahue was A&R rep for Reunion Records, who helped to shape it from the front end office perspective of the record. And it's really been a joy to be able to talk to all those guys and learn about them, not just about Rich. Interesting little tidbit that I picked up from Danny, the bass player, Danny O'Lanerty. His last name used to be Leonard. It was changed here when his ancestors moved into the United States from Ireland. He changed it back. His grandfather used to be a trombone player. He boxed for a living, like boxing. He boxed for a living to pay for trombone lessons. And as a trombonist, I figured that was the reason why he became a trombone player instead of a trumpet player, is because the mouthpiece is big enough to fit a fat lip from boxing. But he played trombone for the Barnum and Bailey's circus back when it was a circus that traveled by train.
Really? Wow. Yeah,
so he literally would ride into town on the bandwagon. You ever heard the phrase, you get on the bandwagon?
Oh, yeah.
That comes from, it's a circus term. So the bandwagon was a wagon that was drawn by horses that would ride into town, and they would have a band playing on the wagon, and it would announce the fact that the circus had come to town. And he was a trombone player for the bandwagon, the Barnum and Bailey Circus. So it's interesting. These guys they've all got their own life stories that are interesting, and I've kind of enjoyed collecting. They've reached the age where they're a bit more reflective about their life. This was one portion of that story, and so I've really enjoyed getting to know each one of them and learn about them as individuals and their contribution to it.
You mentioned that you just had a conversation with Mitch McVicker. How was that experience?
He's as cool as a cucumber, man. I really enjoyed talking with him. He didn't know me from Adam when I got on the phone, but once I'd kind of laid out what it was that I was trying to accomplish, he opened right up and was willing to talk about something. He actually shared with me that it's been several years since he's really talked to anybody about this stuff, which I find fascinating. And I would think that people would bug him all the time about it. But something Andrew said in his reflection on the concert at Ryman was that fewer and fewer people are asking these questions anymore. Fewer and fewer people are requesting to hear or getting excited about the songs that Andrew covers when he plays out live. I believe that Liturgy, Legacy, and a Ragamuffin Band, that record, is not just in the top 3 Christian records. I believe that you could put that in the top 3 of any record that's ever been produced as far as popular music. One of the things that Jimmy Abegg shared with me is that he feels like the sonic space that Reed Arvin and Tom Lonnie created for that record is just a very special thing that doesn't happen every day of the week. You can put that right next to Pet Sounds and it stands up. Not just the songs, but every aspect of that recording was all of those guys kind of hit their zenith at the same time, the pinnacle of their career, and they were at the height of their powers. One of the things that Mitch shared with me today, he said he kind of felt like he got Rich in his twilight. He was a man who had already said what he had to say. It's my feeling that he got it all out when he wrote and recorded Liturgy Legacy. That was kind of the height of his powers. And Reed Arvin confirms that too in my talk with him.
Rich often spoke about weakness, doubt, and yet God's grace and love for us. Do you think we still see that level of honesty today in Christian music?
Honestly, I'm sure there are guys out there that are doing it well, but they're few and far between. It was probably the case back then too. There's so little that's appealing from what's going on, at least from a radio standpoint. Mm-hmm. One of the fellows that I talked to, I think it might have been Jimmy, but I'm not 100% positive, Jimmy Abegg. They were talking about a record that was being produced by the Terry Taylor, I believe. So it was on the Lost Dogs and West Coast guy. And he was producing a record and had all these session players in there. He's like, all right, I want you to play the song. And they played the song, and he was like, great. Now what I would like you to do is I'd like you to dumb it down a little bit. You're playing with too nice of a touch. I'd like you to, just make it stupider. And so they dumbed it down a little bit, and he goes, all right, well, let's take another shot at it. And this time I want you to really kind of pull it off like a caveman. just go dumb. They did it again. Finally, he says, here's the thing. I need at least 80% more dumb. Just quarter notes as straight and as white as possible. They played the song again, and that was the take. And he took that to the A&R rep and said, here you go. And they were like, this is great. Give us 8 more just like it.
Wow. All right.
Because in a lot of ways, the label's just like movie studios today. Nobody's taking chances anymore. It has to make money. And one of the things that Reed Arvin shared with me when we were talking is that the economy around Christian music collapsed when Napster became a thing. Stealing songs, essentially, that was running rampant, not just in the secular world, but through the church. And people were no longer willing to pay money for CDs anymore. As a result of that, the money that actually was poured into recording Rich Mullins' Liturgy Legacy album, the budget for that isn't even the kind of budget that you would have on like a Coldplay record. They don't spend that kind of money on music anymore. The artists that were making just tons and tons of money. And when I say tons of money, one of the things that kind of surprised me in all of this is that I was talking with Danny O'Lanerty, and we were talking about his life, and he spent a little bit of time. He lived with Gary Chapman for a while. He stayed in his pool house, and I said, Dan, I didn't realize that there was pool house money in Christian music. And he says, Shane, Gary Chapman had a helicopter. And I was like, holy Moses! There's like, I definitely didn't know that there was helicopter money in Christian music. And Beth Lutz, who was one of Rich's friends in college, she was part of the Zion band, one of the singers. She was telling me that when they found out that Rich had died, Michael W. Smith redirected his private jet so that it could be used by the family. And I was like, man, there was a lot of money in that economy of Christian music at the time. When streaming and online piracy became a thing, it undercut all of that. So the acts that weren't immediately financially viable were just gone overnight. So the interesting parts of Christian music and the interesting acts and songwriting, there was just no more money for that anymore. That being the case, it's just a different world now than it used to be back then. I kind of lament the loss of that, because when there's finances available for it, people can really come up with some pretty creative. Rich, even though he had some big hits, considered more of a B level artist. He wasn't Michael W. Smith, he wasn't Amy Grant. So it was grateful that the labels were investing in that kind of thing.
And when you first heard Rich's last album, the Jesus record, how was that experience for you?
Yeah, Jimmy Abeg actually told me when Rick Elias took the little cassette tape that Rich had recorded on the boombox, he took it in to play for the executives at Murr, and the boombox that he was playing it on ate the tape.
Oh, no.
Oh. it's the only one in existence, and he fished it out of the player and had to get the pencil out and like rewind it back into the.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
I'm glad we have it, but it was a bit deflating. He had been talking with Mitch for quite a while about winding down and stepping away, and he was trying to craft an exit strategy from Christian music, but at the same time, he admitted to Mitch that he just couldn't quit. For his life, it's kind of how his brain functioned and what he really took joy in. And aside from kind of being a surrogate father for all these men in his life, he enjoyed writing songs. It would have been interesting to hear some of the stuff that he would have come up with if he'd still been around, for sure.
It's great. Today we have some spiritual successors to Rich. You had mentioned earlier Andrew Peterson. He's always been one of my favorites. And my wife and I, we actually bonded over his music when we were dating. That had such a big effect on us.
Andrew Peterson, the people that he's surrounded himself with are some pretty impressive people. Andy Gillehorn and Jeremy Casella and all these guys. If you've listened to that record, the version they do of I Cry the Name, Alpha Brothers Keeper.
Ooh, yes.
Man,
wow.
I just, what a performance. Unbelievable. Yeah, just sends chills through my spine just thinking about how that sounded in the room. We've loved Peterson for forever, and we were early adopters for the Wing Feather Saga when they did their first Kickstarter. And we read the books to the kids when they were younger, when it was just in paperback, and read them around a campfire. And he's been an inspiration in a lot of ways for a lot of years for our family. So it was a real treat to get an opportunity to speak with him.
In researching and listening to Rich's albums, were there any that you overlooked before or that you've come to appreciate more now that have become your favorites?
I got to see him just a couple of months before he passed. Him and Mitch were doing a show somewhere here in Central Florida. I've not found the ticket stub, so I can't remember exactly where they were when my wife and I saw him. We were still dating at the time. The only CD he was selling at the table was Mechanical of the Plains. So I was like, ooh, new Rich music, you know? So I get home and it's like, Rich is not on the album. I'm like, you know? So the Jesus record, the produced version of that anyway, is Rick Elias and Jimmy and Michael W. Smith and Phil Keaggy and Mark Robertson. I was kind of used to not getting a chance to hear him sing. So really the last two records that we got from him were Brothers Keeper and Liturgy Legacy. But I have dug deeper on Canticles, which is kind of like the deep cuts. Certainly grown in my appreciation for Brothers Keeper for sure. On top of the fact that with everything that I've learned about Liturgy and Legacy, it's a whole other listen now than it was before. It only gets better from here. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, I'm really excited about sharing some of the stuff that I've learned about it. I'm hoping that the book will pair with the album like a fine wine or a nice cheese.
And when do you anticipate the book being completed?
Well, right now I'm kind of in the hunter-gatherer phase, so I've still got a few more people that I'd like to talk to. Kathy Sprinkle, who is a friend of his from Wichita. Some of the Wichita crew that I've not had an opportunity to speak with yet. Kathy just got married this past week. I think she's 69. It's the first time she's been married, and by all accounts, the fellow that she married is a beautiful brother in the Lord. And in a few weeks, I'd hopefully get an opportunity to speak with her and some other people from Wichita. And I'm attempting to track down Eric Hawk, I believe is his name, and a couple of the guys that were part of the whole New Mexico outfit and that traveled with him in the last 6 to 8 months of his career. They had kind of like a makeshift band after the Ragamuffins disbanded. The Lufkin, Texas, you see the whole bunch of people on the stage you don't recognize. It's not Aaron Smith and Rick Elias and Jimmy Abeg. It's a different band. All of that'll be part of the narrative for the book. I'd like to talk to some of those people. Looking forward to circling back around with Mark Robertson again and chatting with him, hoping to get a hold of Linda Elias, which is Rick's wife, possibly Jim Smith, James Bryan Smith, I believe is his full name, who wrote the Arrow Pointing to Heaven, the original Rich Mullins biography. Also, Father Matt McAllister he's in Wichita now, but I believe he played a role of being kind of a spiritual advisor for Rich in the last couple of years of his life as he kind of pursued or kind of kicked the tires on Roman Catholicism too. So I've got to call out to him. Hopefully they get a little bit more on the research side at this point in the process. I've already got a significant gains towards a first draft, but probably a completion of first draft towards the fall sometime.
Ooh. Great. That'll be exciting to read. And before we let you go, for those who may be familiar with Rich or haven't heard of him yet, at the end of the day, what would you like those to take away after reading your book?
I got to tell you, man, the biggest thing I'm looking to articulate from this, aside from, like I said, curating those stories from these fellows that were part of this, which are just really sweet and great stories. It's been a real joy to be able to talk to all these people. In the last 2 or 3 years, I've had a winnowing period in my life when it comes to friendships. Is probably the most subtle way that I could put that. We've had some difficulty, evangelicals can get a pretty bad name from time to time on how they treat each other. And we've had our fair share of abuse at the hands of evangelicals in the last few years. And so we've lost some friends as a result of that. And but at the same time, the Lord has replaced those friends with other brothers that have been the strength of the relationships have been just far exceed and outweigh what was lost in the first place. And I certainly wasn't expecting that God was going to be replacing kind of my crappy friends with with childhood heroes.
Yeah.
It's really been a blessing. But part of what I would really love to articulate is what I believe to be the overwhelming reason why Rich wrote that record in the first place. You know, coming out of a Baptist church, that the point of a good church service is to have a bunch of people come down to the altar call at the end of the service. When you experience the liturgy, whether you experience it in a Roman Catholic church or in an Anglican church, or there are a number of Presbyterian denominations that engage in liturgical worship. When you experience the liturgy, you're called into God's presence, and one of the first things that you do is confess your sin. You get your sin out of the way first, right? The service doesn't culminate in that. You do that at the door when you come in. What Rich was articulating by doing what he did with this record, it goes all the way back to like temple worship. When you walked into the temple door in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, you had to walk through two huge golden troughs of water. I believe they were sitting on the backs of oxen statues. This was the ceremonial water that was meant for cleaning. You know, those jars that were filled with ceremonially clean water that Jesus turned into wine? These troughs were filled with that water. So, the idea being that you're walking through like the waters of the Red Sea, because the water's built up on both sides really high. And so you have to pass through the Red Sea and the waters of the Red Sea, which Paul talks about in the New Testament as the waters of baptism. You've got to pass through the waters of baptism to get in the door. So you go in the back door of a Catholic church or an Anglican church, what's the first thing you see when you walk in the door? You see the baptismal font. To get in, you got to pass through the waters of baptism to get into the door. You get in the back door after passing through the water, and the first thing that you do is you do the sin offering. You bring a lamb to atone for your sin. And the sin offering correlates to the confession of sin in liturgical worship. And then the next offering that you engage in is the ascension offering. The Bible says in the Old Testament that it's where you cube up the animal and you put it on the altar, and the fire consumes it 100%, and that smoke ascends to heaven, and that smoke is food for God. When we engage in that, we're engaging in the reading and reciting of the text of Scripture and the Word, and we're engaging in listening to the homily or the sermon. We're engaging in the confession of the creedal confession, the creed. All of that's part of the ascension, and it culminates in the last offering, which is the peace offering. Do you remember the story in the Bible where the Ark of the Covenant's on a donkey cart, and it jostles, it's about to fall, and the fellow reaches up and steadies it with his hand, and it strikes him dead, right? Well, they put the Ark in this guy named Obed-Edom's house, and he wasn't a Jew. He was an Edomite and a Philistine, and that Ark sat in his house for a long time. And while it's there, his crops are getting blessed. All the women in his house are having a bunch of kids, and the Lord's just blessing the mess out of this guy, right? And David gets jealous. He says, the Lord's blessing this Gentile. So it very much calls back what Moses was talking about in his last address to his people. He said, the Lord's going to take a people who's not even a people, and he's going to bless that people, and he's going to make them into a people, and he's going to bless the mess out of them, and you're going to get jealous, and you're going to be spurred to repent and come back and return to me. And he's talking about the Gentiles across the world. And this is articulated again in Romans chapter 11. When the fullness of the Gentiles have come in, then you will be spurred on to jealousy, and you'll come back. And when you come back, it'll be like life from death for the whole world. So in that sense, David's like, this Gentile's getting blessed. I want that blessing. We've got to bring that ark back into Jerusalem. So he goes and gets it. The priests put it on their shoulders, and they walk 6 paces, and they stop, and they set it down, and they have a feast. They have a peace offering. So they kill a bull, and they have a barbecue, and they eat a meal in the presence of the priests and all the families together. They're all eating this bull in the presence of God to show that they're at peace with God. And the next day, the priests pick it up. They take 6 steps, and they drop it, and they have another barbecue. And they did that all the way from Obed-Edom's house, all the way up to the top of Mount Zion. And that's what they were doing when they were having these feasts and festivals where David was dancing before the Lord, and he upset his wife because he was dancing before the Lord. So the culmination of the service is the peace offering. A Jewish man and his wife and his children, said even nursing infants were brought in for this particular part. And they would come into the presence of the Lord, having confessed their sins at the sin offering, having ascended to the presence with their ascension offerings. They come before the priest with the peace offering. They eat a meal in the presence of the Lord. they eat the flesh of the lamb to show they're at peace with God. And so that's the culmination of worship. So it's not getting your sins forgiven and turning back from being a backslider is not the culmination of a service. It's actually eating a meal in the presence of the Lord is the culmination of worship. So what I'd really love people to take away from this is that there's a right way that the church has been engaging in worship for close to 4,000 years. And we've changed that just in the last 200 years. And we need to return. And I think that's a large part of what Rich was trying to articulate in that, along with some other things that I'm really, really super excited about sharing with you guys. I can't say anything just yet. We found some things that, some Easter eggs, let's just put it that way, that were tucked into the record that have been sitting in plain sight that nobody has discovered up to this point. So I'm really excited about sharing some of that stuff with you guys.
Oh, it's exciting, Shane. Wow. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today and sharing your heart, and just excited to read the book when it comes out. And we'll be praying for you and your blessings during the interview process and as the research continues.
Yeah, I'll keep in touch with you, letting you know how it goes. And once we get a little closer to the release, we can talk in a little bit more detail about what's in it.
Ooh, great. Oh, sounds good.
Well, thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.
Yes, sir.